Welcome to No Room for Phonies, episode 104.
More about books that we...
Books worth reading, I'll call them.
Okay.
And so the book that we're doing today, I'll hold in front. It's called The Advice Trap. And it's basically stay curious and change the way you lead forever. And his name is Michael Bungay Stanier. And the back, it says... Ah, the irony. Here you are holding a book of advice on how to give less advice. So he kind of plays. And one of the other things is what Brene Brown has done for vulnerability, Michael Bungay Stanier has done for curiosity. So it's good. So just some highlights from this book. One of the things that I've read a lot about is the idea that less is more, and saying less and asking more matters. And we need to be curious about each other instead of judgmental. So he really focuses in on that whole idea of curiosity and asking questions. And there's a lot of examples of good questions to ask. And his theory is that, and we were listening to that thing today on empathy and how it can be taught. His theory is that if you practice asking good questions and you keep practicing and practicing and practicing, then you'll get good at it. So
good. You can get better at listening then too.
Yes. And then he says there's hard change versus easy change. Easy change is kind of like, you need a new app. I need a new app for this.
Or just an upgrade on
an upgrade or something. But hard change is about needing like a whole new operating system.
Okay.
Like some of the things that you talk about, like we talk
to Windows 11.
I think both of us who have worked in education have talked about how slow things happen in education. Yeah. So there's an operating system that actually does need to change. And
what? Easy change doesn't create victims, or does? Or neither of them really?
Yeah, avoid trying to save people and meddling in their business. So they're saying, don't create victims. Look at the system and change it.
Oh, that's good.
Right. So, and then he talks about the advice monster having 3 personas.
So the advice monster is basically the person or the nature in us that wants us to
like just
come out and give advice all the time.
Yes. Yeah.
Like what we do on this podcast.
Yes, exactly. No. So there's the tell it, that means where you sit and tell and I have all the answers.
Yeah.
And the save it, in that you are responsible for saving everybody.
Yeah, that's another monster feature.
And then the last monster is the control it. If you're not in control as the leader, then everything's just going to fail. And then
I found it interesting that then he talked about the importance of using empathy.
Yeah.
Just like the other podcast we listened to today. So that's like a greater sense of what is real for the other person.
Yeah. And so he gives those definitions of empathy, mindfulness, and humility. And I love these definitions. They've been like my favorite ones. So mindfulness is a greater sense of what's real about the situation. And humility is a greater sense of what's real about you.
Interesting. So it's kind of opposite to like if the monster is tell it, then having humility is having a greater sense of what's real about you. Because if you know what's real about you, you're not so prone to
if your tendency is to like tell or save or control, and you have enough humility to know that that's what you're like,
right?
Then you learn to tame those monsters. And then all through the book, it's about practice, get feedback, adapt, and repeat, and continue to be curious. Like that's his big thing. The book is really a complete coaching toolkit. I think he's written another book on coaching.
It's called The Coaching Habit. It was his first book on coaching,
But this just goes, I think, into more like practical like questions. I mean, I didn't actually read the other book. And I like the line yet. I like the idea where he says, ask a question and then shut up. Right? And like I said before, like there's lots of tips about questions because questions help us stay curious a little longer. If you can stay in questioning mode, then you're staying staying curious, right? So.
And then he talks about single questions. So not having like 2 points embedded in one question, right?
Like he says that combination questions are better.
Oh.
So you ask a question and then you say, and what else?
Oh, okay.
And what
so the
else?
combination is
to keep digging.
Being curious, yeah.
And then he talks about the idea of our idea when we get to a problem is to seek a solution, right? Mm-hmm. Like you sit in a meeting and you say, okay, how are we going to solve that?
Right.
Instead, we should be looking for the challenges and kind of be known as the person who helps articulate the critical issues, not the person who provides the hasty answer to solve the problem.
Okay.
Because that's easier, right? Like you want, okay, I know how to solve this here. We just do this and this and this. So, and if you are the one if you are the leader and you're the one that's always solving the problem, then you're not really creating the space for other people to develop insight. Like you're not really empowering people to.
Or ownership.
Right, of it. Because the true leader wants other people to reach the heart of the matter, not just the leader.
Right.
Because it's a little bit, then you're just, people stop thinking and stop being curious themselves. They're just like, well, if I bring up a problem, he or she is just going to tell me what to go and do. And then it's done.
So they give up ownership as well.
Yes, of everything. So then there's things called the foggy fires.
Oh, I was wondering what
so these are things that make...
well, the foggy fires. So they obviously cloud up or burn through or whatever.
Right, they cloud the issue, right? They make everything foggy.
So there's several of them then.
So like twirling is when you come up with a solution too early. Like you just... and you're done.
Yeah.
And then coaching the ghost. This one is very interesting because a person brings you a problem and you start questioning and then they start talking.
Divert to somebody
else, right?
Yeah,
and so that
blame or
right.
This other person said this.
So you don't want to coach the ghost of a person who's not there.
Right.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Settling. If you just settle for a solution. Right. Then you've completely missed the point of kind of talking through it. Popcorning, that's when the conversation kind of gets out of control and there's too many problems being discussed. Like we have this, I've had this conversation with a lot of people. Like when I used to be a principal and someone would come to an in-school team with issues about a child and they'd have like 10, and I'd say, well, let's focus in on 2 and then let's create some strategies for those 2, and then when those 2 are kind of under control, then we can go, and maybe some of the other ones will go away once we focus on the critical. What are the 2 most critical kind of things but that idea of popcorning. Big picturing is like talking about the big trends and generalizations and not getting to anything specific.
Sorry, I'm just thinking of a situation at work where this happens a lot.
Yeah, like you go on and on and on about the big, and then you never really get to. And I think that's frustrating for people.
And the best one is yarning, which is going off on tangents and telling stories.
And he says... Stop the madness. Interrupt. When someone is yarning, you stop the madness.
So I remember when, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
We always used to do it.
You literally stop the madness.
Okay.
Like you've talked about that, I think, a lot when it's come to your staff meetings and things, when somebody just starts yarning and going on. People start yarning and everyone starts yawning. Yeah. And it's up to the leader to literally stop the madness and interrupt and say, thank you for your nice story, but this is the issue we're talking about right now, which is not easy to do.
No, it isn't.
But
it can
everything, and he also always says that you should be remembering to say, and what else? And what else? Is there anything else?
Mm-hmm. Keep going.
And, well, you look like there's a problem.
No, I'm just changing the setting there.
All right. So he just keeps saying you need to, because your job is to keep people in the conversation. Mm-hmm. Your job is not to shut people down. When the going gets tough, this is one of my favorite quotes.
Get going.
No. The brain starts looking for a way out.
Oh.
So when you're in a really courageous conversation with someone and you've really gotten to the heat of the matter and things start getting like tough to figure things out, then people are looking for a way out. Mm-hmm. That's just human nature.
Yeah, it's our bodies.
Right? It's that fight. Flight syndrome, right? Yeah. So, because your brain starts feeling like, is this situation safe for me? Mm-hmm. And if you don't feel safe, then you really start looking for a way out. Right. So that's the kind of the job of the leader, is to keep things safe so that people feel like they can have the conversation they need to have. And so there's these things to help people feel safe. And they're called, the first one is called tribe. In other words, you are on their side. Right. Like you give them the impression
that you're part of the tribe.
That you're listening. You've got this. Mm-hmm. And then the other one is expectation, like show them what the future looks like. Give them hope, right? And then rank is raising them up to feel like they're equal with you.
Right. So then the power plays of the past management don't work.
No. Because you want people to feel like they, remember when we talked in the other book about all that lattice of leadership where you should be allowed to go across and no one should say to you, ooh, you need to stay in your lane. You're not, you shouldn't be giving this idea, or you shouldn't be talking to me. Right. And it's really difficult for people, right? Because even like if someone goes over your head, right? I used to, the common example is that a parent would not like something I've said, or just go straight over my head and not even talk to me.
No, without even knowing.
And then the superintendent would call and I would say, I don't know, they didn't ask me. Mm-hmm. But if they want to ask you more, that's fine. If you've got an idea on how to handle this, I'm all ears. Right. Not taking that personally and just saying, yes, everybody, I guess, has the right to do that and whatever. Yeah. And then autonomy is really actually making sure that people feel like they have a choice.
Well, that means that it has to be an honest.
Yes.
You can't make it so that it's
a choice when it's not. Because that's transparency, right? Yeah. And so people, whatever. Mm-hmm. You need to come close because you're always quiet. Your job as the leader is to make coaching an everyday interaction. Coaching is no longer an event. So every conversation that you're having with people, you're remembering to practice the principles that are in the book.
Well, I know that I need to watch the videos that accompany the book so that I can do
there's a lot of, I'll get to that later, but there's a whole bunch of, if you buy the book and get the book, there's a whole bunch of things that are part of it. Your job is also to be courageous and define who you want to be in the future and not just continue to be where you are.
You mean the coach? Or
yes, the coach, the leadership.
Oh, okay.
As a leader, you say, here I am today. This is what I do, but this is what I want to be down the road. So, and that takes courage, right? Because you have to really be honest with yourself about where you are kind of in the whole idea of coaching. And I think of this even with our kids sometimes when they're asking us for things. I try to question what they're doing so that they have to actually think about it. Rather than
us just being advice givers.
And I think as the leader or the adult or the parent, we're always thinking that we have to be the first in the game to offer the suggestion or the answer. You don't have to worry about them coming up with an answer. And I think for some leaders, they feel if I don't have the answer, then they're not going to respect me.
Right. And that's not necessarily the case.
Well, if you are, and I think that as a leader, you should actually be transparent about, like, I'd give this a book to my staff and say, this is what I'm working on. Mm-hmm. Because then this is what they should be doing with each other. Yeah. Because when there's a problem come up, mm-hmm. you know, and there's lots of strategies for getting at issues. Like you used you liked the one where you write. It's not brainstorming. Brainwriting, where people write individually what they think some ideas are.
It's a strategy to avoid groupthink and to shut ideas down, because that's what happens in brainstorming a lot.
Well, and especially in environments where there's people who have been, and that's all environments, I guess.
Yeah, I think so.
Where people have been there a long time,
mm-hmm.
and then people are new, and new people aren't going to, and sometimes people have been there for a long time are actually a bit insulting towards people who are new mm-hmm. and their ideas. So when you brainwrite, everybody writes individually, and then all the ideas get shared, and you kind of make sure that you hear from everybody in that way, right? As a leader, you don't have to jump to save everything, and you're not responsible for every failure, and you can't make choices on behalf of others. They have to take ownership and responsibility. So if you build a coaching environment where you're curious and you ask questions, there's a better chance of that happening. Because I think
in the team,
I think as leaders, it's very hard. And I mean, the environment that I worked in, I was blamed for anything that went wrong.
Mm-hmm.
When
you're
the leader, you're responsible for what happens. Not necessarily.
No.
Like, because you think of groupthink and that kind of bullying that happens when there's a group of people.
Yeah.
One person is not going to be able to stand up against that.
Mm-mm.
And no matter how, and I think sometimes what happens for some of these people, and it's often the people who have been around for a while, is the new people, all of a sudden they see that the new people are being listened to
mm-hmm.
and things start changing. And then they're like, whoa, we got to get back control of this, right? So you can't really, and he talks about the idea of you don't have to course correct every conversation, and you don't have to be in complete control to survive.
Right. Well, and it's also, I mean, I think if you go into like a meeting or a conversation with an agenda, you can't be a stickler for it going exactly the way you plan, because it's not about it being derailing. It's just it has to be organic.
Right. And especially, you know, for example, you've gathered information from everybody and now you're taking it back
mm-hmm.
for more discussion or whatever. You can't have in your mind what the outcome's going to be.
No, you really have to be curious to see what the group
what comes up with.
Yeah.
Right? So, and he also talks about the fact that the power of the status quo is strong, and he calls that the dark side,
strong.
Because change is unsettling, and he warns against falling back into old habits. And he's more talking about you as a coach and not your organization.
Oh, okay.
Like he's saying, it's so much easier to just go back and be the other kind of leader where mm-hmm. you're in control, you're telling people what to do, and you're not. And I think what's difficult about this, in our highly unionized environment, is the amount of time this takes.
Yes.
Because people, and the fact that people in your environment particularly, people actually have to be around in the room for these things to take place.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
And then there's a limit to how much you can get them in the room.
Right? So it is challenging.
Yeah.
Because I think it is challenging.
Mm-hmm.
So his advice to leaders is to give as much as you can, be generous with silence,
mm-hmm.
be generous with transparency, and be generous with appreciation by focusing on who they are and not what they've done.
Right.
And that's such a big thing, right? Like, you look at people who struggle when they retire, and it's because their total identity
is who they were, or
is
are.
What they do,
yes,
what they did,
right.
or do, instead of actually who they are as a person. You know, and I think that's a really good exercise to kind of do if you struggle with that, is to kind of make the T-chart and say, this is who I am. I'm generous, I'm kind, I'm reflective, I'm courageous. This is what I do. These are my roles.
Right. Well, I think as a leader, though, it's important to think of your team members and to think, okay, yes, so there's a pattern of behavior. So it's what they do typically.
Right.
But it's not necessarily who they are.
No. Right.
They have habits or reasons why they respond that way. And
and they may have...
there's a few people on my team, they always are devil's advocates.
Right.
They always, but that's not a bad thing necessarily.
And if you start asking that question, well, what else?
Yeah.
Or what's next? Or what else? Then, what does it say here? Is there anything else? Is there anything else? Is there anything else?
Yeah.
Because you're challenging people to think beyond their initial mindset to something, broader. And the same for you. And he also says to challenge yourself as much as you can to be a different kind of leader, like to continue to grow as a leader.
And as a coach.
And Paul Drucker says the leaders of the future will know how to ask. And if you actually buy this book and use it as a manual, he talks about every interaction can be coach-like. He talks about asynchronous coaching, synchronous coaching.
Wow.
He talks about a lot of these are try doing this. Like what will get in the way of tribe? How do you show them the future? So he gets into super, super detail. Like when it comes to twirling, he says the appearance of it. What does it look like? Why is it distracting? What to remember? How to beat it? And then what your coaching habit, instead of jumping in and solving it, either by offering up suggestions or getting them to find solutions, I will stay curious a little bit longer by using the focus combo and asking, and what else is the real challenge here for you? Before focusing with, so what's the real challenge here for you? Like he's giving you like a very straightforward manual on how
and to be transparent, I've only read the first 3 chapters so far.
Okay, yeah. And everyone's shocked about that.
Well, you are retired and have a lot more time to
I'm
read.
not saying. When you start with a coaching mindset, when you start this, prepare to be uncomfortable and prepare yourself to self-coach.
Okay.
Like to ask yourself the kinds of
those questions.
Yeah, like to stop yourself.
Being the reflective practitioner.
And then this is what you were referring to. This book includes 52 6-minute long videos on coaching, leadership, and behavior change that you get access to through the book. There's a website in here, but I'm not going to give that because that's not fair.
No, you have to buy the book.
The person. If you are going to give advice, do it well. Tone down your assuredness.
Here's my best guess.
Yes. This is just one idea. So instead of saying, well, this is what I think, you kind of tone that down. Deliver it with confidence when it's the right moment. Like it's never not a moment to say, you have a right to say your ideas just like everybody else, exactly. Right? Debrief it by asking if this gives what the person was looking for.
Yeah.
Like, is this what you wanted to?
Well, just like that other thing we were listening to today is to check in.
Yeah.
And did I, what grade do you give me on listening to you? Or what grade do you give me on helping you today?
Well, and there's a whole idea about feedback and what that means, right? And the idea that, when I was teaching, I would put a goal up for a lesson. And then at the end of the lesson, I would say to the kids, did we do that? How does everybody feel? Thumbs up, thumbs down. How do you feel? Like it wasn't. They were a lot of times I was teaching grade 1 or grade 2.
Right.
But we were gonna do I don't know,
but a grade 1 would know.
We were gonna learn the difference between a triangle and a circle and a square.
Yeah.
Does everybody get it? And if somebody went like this, then I made a note that I needed to sit with them and help them figure it out.
Right.
Like, can you imagine teaching a lesson and not
knowing by the end of the lesson
whether everybody got it until you maybe have the unit test, and then you discover, oh, geez, nobody got it.
And then what happens, though, when you have students where you say, any questions? And there's no questions, because that's not the right answer to... That's not the right question to ask at the end of a class.
But the question is, look at that. Do you know the difference between a circle, a triangle, and a square?
Yeah.
And, I mean, a lot of times by the end of the lesson, I had been around enough to know who didn't, but I wanted them to start self-reflecting. Right.
Yeah.
The
and
self-reflection...
it's something they need to learn how to do as well.
Yeah. And then he also gives a lot of recommended books on coaching and leadership, like other books on coaching and leadership. So, I think this is a great book. It's super, 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 super practical. If you were being like a new leader, like this would be
you can, for parents of adult children, parents of teenagers.
And the whole...
even between friends.
And the whole thing about it is to stay curious. And interestingly enough, I was reading another book by Richard Rohr this week, and that's exactly what he's saying. Instead of, there being a dualistic society where there's one side and there's another side, we need a triune society where there's one person's idea, another person's idea, and a third idea that will influence both ideas. So that we're not caught in this bipolar or culture, like world. This hugely polar environment that we currently have, right? Where, we drive around and we see signs like F. Trudeau and stuff like that, where how is that helpful?
Yeah.
Or
proud to be the fringe.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that I agree with everything that has happened.
No.
But I think we would have a better society if we didn't disrespect and dehumanize the other person. And I think if you don't have this kind of coaching curious mindset, then you tend to say, oh, what an idiot. Like, that's stupid.
Yeah.
Which is dehumanizing.
Which is what they're doing, to the other side.
Yeah, which is dehumanizing. Yeah. So anyway, it's a great book. Highly recommend it. And the next book that we're going to talk about is on January 30th, Books Worth Reading, The Science of Stuck.
A book I've read from cover to cover.
So anyway, thanks for joining us to talk about another book worth reading.
The Advice Trap.
And I hope that if you are a leader or a parent or in anything, that you take a serious look at maybe wanting to get it, because it's a really practical book. Plus, I will show you, it's a super easy read. Like, I want to say, how many pages is it?
Big print.
It's not even 200. It's not even 250 pages.
Yeah,
but part of the back of it is books.
Oh yeah.
He's recommending
it's like 30
books.
pages just a book recommendation.
Yeah, and then there's a lot of blank pages. Let me offer you some advice. Write down what was useful about this chapter, so you can actually journal along right in the book. So it's a great book. So thanks for joining us. No Room for Phonies, episode 104. Books Worth Reading, The Advice Trap.
Good night.